Clara May Turner stopped screaming only when her voice broke and turned into a dry hiss. The rope around her wrists burned. Her arms pulled so high they shook. Eli Turner just leaned back in his chair. Boots on the table, one hand on a bottle, the other lazily stroking the pistol in his lap. The back room of the saloon in Abilene stank of sweat, whiskey, and fear. 3 men at the poker table laughed, the kind of laugh that said they had seen too many ugly things to care about one more. On the floor beside them, Clara knelt with her hands tied to a ceiling beam. Dressed dusty, knees bruised, eyes shining with angry tears. Eli took another drink. He called her his girl, but every word out of his mouth felt like a chain. He had lost everything that afternoon: cattle, saddle, rifle, even the old wagon. There had been a time when Eli worked honest cattle and came home sober, but that man was gone a long time ago. The only thing left to throw on the table was Clara. Have you ever seen a man fall this low for a handful of chips? He grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked her head back so the men could see her face. "She will do just fine for your friend in Topeka," he slurred. Clara bit her lip until she tasted blood, because if she cried, they would enjoy it. Outside, the summer sun was sinking over the Kansas prairie, turning the dust in the streets to gold. It was the summer of 1871, and Abilene still felt young and rough around the edges. Cowboys laughed in the main room, the piano clanged out a crooked tune, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle sang. No one out there knew that in this cramped back room, a young woman was being sold like a broken saddle. Clara was only 23, but life had already taken her mother, her home, and most of her hope. All she had left were the tricks her mother had taught her for church fairs and summer shows. She could bend, flip, and twist her body in ways that made people clap, and Eli had turned that into another way to earn money off her. Tonight he went further. He slammed his cards on the table and shouted that by sunrise Clara would belong to a stranger. One of the men asked how he planned to keep her from running. Eli smiled, a slow, mean smile, and said he knew a tree by the river that had never told a secret. Out on the prairie, an older rancher named Samuel Walker rode home to his wife. Thinking only about fences and tired cattle, he had no idea that before the next sunset he would find that same girl tied to a tree, begging him not to touch her, while the whole town whispered that he had lost his honor. If you saw that with your own eyes, would you believe the rancher was a savior or a sinner? Clara barely remembered how she ended up tied to that cottonwood tree by the Smoky Hill River. The rough bark scraped her back and her wrists burned from the ropes. Her arms were stretched high over her head until her shoulders felt like they might tear. Ropes at her ankles pulled her legs wide apart against the tree until every muscle in her hips ached. The evening sun threw long orange lines across the prairie, and for a moment she wondered if this was the last sunset she would ever see. Eli had dragged her out there himself. Her dress still covered her, but the way he tied her there made her feel more exposed than if she had nothing on at all. He kept muttering that a buyer was coming at dawn, someone who did not care if she cried or begged. Clara tried not to think about that part. She tried to breathe slowly, but the ropes cut deeper each time she trembled. A warm wind rolled across the grass. Her hair blew into her face, and she blinked hard because if she cried, the tears would sting like fire. She whispered to herself that someone would ride by. Someone had to, because if nobody came, you already know how this kind of story usually ends. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then steady. Almost calm, like the rider believed the world was still a decent place. Samuel Walker guided his horse along the riverbank, thinking only about a busted fence and a sick calf. He was tired, dusty, ready to go home to his wife and a warm meal. But when his horse stopped suddenly, he followed its gaze and saw a shape pressed against the tree. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow. Then the shape moved. Sam slid out of the saddle and walked closer, his boots sinking into the soft dirt. The sight hit him so fast that he actually stepped back. A young woman was tied up in a way no human should ever be tied. Her arms were stretched above her head. Ropes ran from each ankle to the trunk, forcing her legs out wide and holding her against the tree. Her chest heaved with every breath. One wrong move and the next rider along would swear he was the monster, not the man trying to save her. Claire saw a shadow move toward her and she panicked. She squeezed her eyes shut and cried out, "Yeah, please don't do that." Her voice cracked like dry wood. Sam raised both hands to show he meant no harm. He took a step back instead of a step closer. "All right," he said quietly. "I will not touch you yet, but these ropes have to come off." He slipped off his coat and held it up like a curtain. "I am going to throw this over your shoulders first. You will be covered. Then I will cut the ropes. You will not have to look at me if you do not want to." Claire opened her eyes just enough to see the coat in his hands. She did not trust men, but she trusted the feel of cloth more than bare skin. She gave the smallest nod. Sam eased the coat around her, careful not to brush more than he had to. Only when she was wrapped up did he take out his knife. He cut the rope above her wrists first, then worked at the knots around her waist and ankles, talking the whole time so she would not jump at the sound of the blade. If he did nothing, this girl would not survive the night. And what Sam was about to do next would change both their lives forever. Sam did not waste a second. The moment Clara hit the ground, her legs buckled and he lunged forward to hold her steady. She grabbed his shirt like she was clinging to the edge of a cliff, her breath coming in short bursts. Her whole body shook, part from pain, part from fear, and part from the shock of being touched by someone who did not mean to harm her. Sam spoke in a calm voice. "It is all right. You are safe now. Just breathe for me." Clara tried, but every breath stung, so she closed her eyes and leaned into his chest for a moment. She did not know this man, but something in his voice felt solid, steady. It sounded like the low voice of a man who had calmed wild colts and drunk cowboys for a long time. Sam lifted her gently and set her on his horse. Clara could barely sit upright, so he walked beside the horse and kept a hand on her leg to keep her from falling. Every few steps she whispered that she was sorry, as if being hurt was somehow her fault. Sam shook his head each time. No girl should ever have to apologize for surviving. By the time they reached the Walker ranch house, the lamps inside were already glowing. Ruth Walker opened the door with a surprised look on her face, then a worried one. She did not know Clara, but the ropes around the girl's wrists told the whole story. Ruth led them inside and got towels and warm water, fussing in the firm but gentle way women of her age always did. Clara sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a quilt, watching Ruth and Sam move around the room. For the first time in years, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt safe, and that is usually the moment when trouble remembers where you live. But every time her eyes drifted toward the dark window, she remembered Eli. He was still out there, still angry, still coming. Sam noticed the way her hands trembled as she sipped water. He pulled up a chair and said quietly, "You are not alone here. Not tonight. Not ever again if I can help it." Clara looked at him, unsure if she dared believe that. But something deep inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this tired rancher was the first good man she'd met in her whole life. And just as she let that thought settle, a sharp sound echoed outside the house, a sound that told Sam and Clara that Eli Turner was not done yet. If you're still with me, take a sip of your tea and let me know what time it is where you're listening from. And if you enjoy stories like this one, feel free to subscribe for the next chapter. That sharp sound outside was not a coyote or a loose shutter. It was a fist on the front door, hard enough to rattle the plates in the cupboard. Sam was on his feet before the second knock landed. Years of ranch work had worn his body down, but some things never left a man. He still moved fast when trouble called his name. He reached for the Winchester rifle by the door and glanced at Ruth. She already had one hand on Clara's shoulder, pressing the girl gently back into her chair. The kitchen lamp threw long shadows on the walls, and for a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then Eli's voice slid in through the cracks. "Sam Walker, I know you got my girl in there." His words were thick with whiskey and mean as a spooked bull. Clara went white. Her fingers dug into the quilt until her knuckles showed. Ruth felt that grip and something inside her shifted. She was a church woman, but she was also a woman, and she knew fear when she felt it in another hand. Sam stepped onto the porch and eased the door shut behind him. He did not point the rifle yet, but he held it like a man who knew how. Eli stood at the bottom of the steps, hat crooked, eyes wild. "You brought her here." Eli spat in the dirt. "You think you can just take what is mine?" Sam's voice stayed low. "She is not a cow to be traded. Eli, she is a person, and she is not going anywhere with you tonight." Eli laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You think that little wife of yours will stand by you when this town hears you had a young girl tied up in your house?" The words hit harder than any fist. Sam felt the heat crawl up his neck, not from guilt, but from the shame of even being pictured that way. Behind the door, Ruth heard every word. She opened it and stepped out beside her husband, her chin lifted. "Eli Turner," she said, "you leave this place. That girl was hurt, and my husband brought her here so she would not die alone in the dirt. You know what you did." For a moment, the night got very quiet. Eli's eyes flicked from Sam to Ruth, then to the lit window where Clara's shadow trembled on the curtain. He reached for his pistol. Sam moved first. The rifle cracked, not to kill, but to blast the dirt inches from Eli's boots. From that shot on, there was no turning back. Not for Sam and not for Clara. The shot lit up the yard and sent Eli stumbling back, cursing, promising he would drag Sam into town and ruin his name. By morning, every mouth in Abilene would be talking. And the only way Sam could protect Clara now was to face Eli Turner in front of the whole town. So what do you think happened when those two men finally met in the streets of Abilene? The next morning, Abilene woke up hungry for gossip. Word travels fast in a small cattle town. By the time Samuel Walker rode into Abilene, folks were already lined up along the main street, pretending to sweep doorways and carry crates just to see what would happen. Ruth rode beside him in the wagon. Claire was not with them. She stayed back at the parsonage with the preacher's wife, wrapped in a borrowed dress, far from the stares and whispers of town. Sam tied his horse in front of the saloon while Ruth climbed down from the wagon. She smoothed her skirt with hands that shook only a little. They walked toward Eli together, husband and wife, side by side. Ruth told the sheriff and the crowd what Claire had told her the night before, how he tied her to that tree, how he planned to sell her at dawn, how Sam had cut her down and carried her home instead of turning away. Ruth lifted her chin and said that every word was true. The sheriff looked at Eli and asked a simple thing. "Is that what you call being a father, Eli?" Eli barked a bitter laugh and said, "Once I was a better man than any of you, but the world did not care." Eli reached for his pistol. The sheriff took one step forward. "Eli, take your hand off that gun. You know the law in this town." Eli smiled a hard, ugly smile and pulled anyway. Right there in the middle of Abilene, with the whole town watching, he chose violence over the truth. Sam moved out of habit, not hatred. 2 shots rang out, close together. Sam did not feel proud in that moment, only certain there had been no other choice. When the dust settled, Eli was on the ground and the fight was over. The sheriff knelt, checked Eli's pulse, then looked up at Sam and gave a slow, weary nod. "Do you think any man walks away from a street like that without paying some kind of price in his own mind?" Life did not turn into a fairy tale overnight. That winter was hard. Ruth's health failed, slow and steady, the way a lamp burns down when the oil runs out. Before she passed, she took Sam's hand and made him promise he would not spend the rest of his days alone and bitter. Clara stayed on at the ranch, at first like a daughter, not a wife. She helped with cattle, fixed fences, cooked meals, and learned how to stand on her own 2 feet. She saved every spare dollar in a tin box and later bought a small piece of land near the Walker place with her own name on the paper. 2 summers came and went. Have you ever had years like that yourself? Quiet on the outside, but loud in your heart. Grief got quieter. Work went on. Somewhere in all that time, respect turned into friendship, and friendship grew into something deeper that neither of them tried to rush. On a warm summer evening, they went back to the same place where Clara once cried, "Please don't do that." This time there were flowers, a preacher, and a couple of close friends. Sam took her hands, rough and scarred from years of work, and she smiled through happy tears. "Please don't let me go," she whispered, out there on the prairie. Two broken lives decided they were not finished yet. Maybe that is the real heart of this story. Not the gunshots, not the gossip, but the quiet choice to stand up for someone who has no one. To tell the truth when lies are easier, and to believe that love can show up late and still be right on time. So let me ask you, if you had been standing in that street in Abilene, would you have backed the loud man with the easy story, or the tired rancher who did the right thing when no one was watching? And in your own life, is there a person you are meant to stand up for, even if it costs you something? If this story gave you a little strength or a little comfort, feel free to tap like so it can reach someone else who needs it. And if you enjoy spending these quiet minutes together, you are always welcome to subscribe and ride along for the next tale from the Old West. Now take a sip of whatever you're drinking, look at the clock, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and where you're listening from today.